enough, or do I need to move it closer? I just don't like it right in front of me. Yeah, how about now? We'll give it just a little more time. We think another member is due to arrive. If not, we'll proceed. We can, is that correct? It being 6:33 by my clock, I think we'll begin. I want to start with recommending or encouraging everyone to get close to the mic when you speak so that we don't lose any of the recording of what's being said. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance and an invocation. Do I have a volunteer for the Pledge of Allegiance? You do?
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
We just ask that you be with us tonight. We have decisions to make, and we need wisdom, and integrity in all that we do. So we ask that you be here with us and ensure that that is the case. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. This is a continuation of two previous meetings. There are no minutes to read. They have not been yet compiled completely. So we'll move on. There are no public hearings today. So old business. Continuation from meeting on August 27th and October 2nd regarding a variance request for case number Z 2024-00196, a request by Dwayne Carabin. So that's where we'll start. Mr. Carabin, no, wait, the county, would you like to make your case?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Matt Smolin, County Administrator for King George. So really there's no additional information from the county standpoint other than the revised plan that was submitted by the applicant. County standpoint is the same. I think it is a much better plan, but we have to follow the law. There's 5 criteria that are outlined for a variance, but that's what we're looking at. So you have the revised plan in front of you. Nothing additional beyond that, sir.
All right, thank you. Mr. Carabin, or your representative?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. I'm Clark Lemming, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I'm sorry I missed the first 2 meetings, but you've been at this for quite a while, and I don't intend to complicate things. But there are some matters that I want to be sure to get on the record. And the main reason for that is because of a statement. I watched the videos carefully. A statement made.
I'm sorry, could you repeat your name and how you represent the applicant?
I'm his attorney, and my name is Clark Lemming.
Clark Lemon.
Yes, sir. And
Thank
I've
you.
been practicing in Virginia doing land use law for 40 years, and I've been before 15 different BZAs, and actually had a matter pending with this one some years ago. So I've done a lot of this kind of work. Now, I did watch closely the videos, and there was a statement made by Mr. Stewart, the county attorney here, saying that, trying to give you advice that if this variance were adopted, that the BZA may well be sued. Now, I don't know who would be the entity that would bring that suit, but because that statement has been made, and because the Board of Supervisors does have the right to jump in after this proceeding and challenge a variance, there are some things I would like to get on the record. Now, in the way of background, I think you all probably appreciate that this all started with a building permit application. It was denied. I'm not sure what the ground was. I don't know whether there was a water dependency analysis that was done or what the reason was. But at that time, the interim zoning administrator and planning director was Richard Stewart Jr. And he advised Mr. Carabin that what he needed to do, rather than appeal that, was to go this route for the variance. And indeed, in your ordinance, there is a provision that under your Chesapeake Bay Overlay District that says, if you want relief from the provisions here, you go to the BZA and use those rules and get a variance. Now, I believe that that arises from a provision in the Chesapeake regs. This is 9 VAC 25-831-50. And this is the section that goes into relief from the Ches Bay regs. And the particular device that's utilized under the regs is exceptions, not variances, but exceptions. More, and they're criteria that are set forth for exceptions that are quite similar to the criteria for variances, except for the threshold criteria. And Mr. Chairman, on the video, you correctly recognize that there's an or, two different threshold questions, reasonable restriction and physical hardship. So that's not in the exceptions here. Now, the next section of the reg says each government shall design and implement an appropriate process or processes for the administration of exceptions, not variances, exceptions. The process to be used for exceptions shall include, but is not limited to, the following. An exception may be considered and acted upon only by the local legislative body, the local planning commission, or special committee, board, or commission established or designated by the local government. Now, I think what King George County has done is to designate the Board of Zoning Appeals. The question is, provision goes on. That entity established or designated by the local government to implement the provisions of this act in this chapter. It's a lot more than exceptions. Now, I don't know what the delegation was that was made to the BZA, but it's more than just exceptions if this is the provision that the county followed. Now, as you know, I'm sure, the BZA is a creature of statute, and it can only do those particular things that the General Assembly delegates to the BZA. So here we have an exception process that goes to the substance of the matter raised tonight, an intrusion into the RPA. But what the county says is that you all should do a variance, which is completely different criteria and is not something that is designated if you look at the definition for a variance. And in there about RPA or CHESBA or anything like that. Now, I was struck in preparing for this and tried to do a little research. There's a very recent Virginia Court of Appeals case. It comes out of the city of Alexandria, and it's Avalonia versus city of Alexandria. Now, in that case, the applicant had a home in historic Alexandria and wanted to build a driveway, but in the historic district can't do it. So you have to approach by alley. So went to the BZA, got a variance. City of Alexandria sued and said, no, that's not a good variance. And both the circuit court and the Court of Appeals agreed and said that exceeded the scope, the narrow scope of things that are delegated to the BZA under that very definition of BZA that I think Mr. Stewart shared with you at the last meeting. So that's what the BZA is limited to. Now, so where does that put us? Well, I don't know whether the BZA has the authority to grant a variance under these circumstances, even though the county has put CHESBA regs into their zoning ordinance, which is a whole different discussion. But what I don't think there's authority to do is to have the BZA administer a variance for the issue that clearly arises from the CHESBA regs. So now, having reached that conclusion, what do we do? And that's your all's question. And I know you'll consult with your counsel. I did talk briefly with Mr. Slavin about this. I know he's still out. Mr. Lavin, I'm sorry. But let's see what can be accomplished. What I'm going to do, having raised that issue and what I think the basis is for that, I assume that you haven't done one of these previously. This is a new provision to the ordinance. Most localities, of course, have particular commissions or boards, wetlands boards, CHESBA boards, that sort of thing. But BZA is certainly not spelled out in the regs here, and it's a broader delegation of authority. And it specifically says you can find somebody else to hear exceptions, not variances. Now, I raised this, and I want my client to be able to do what they want to do, but I don't want to get up at some point, perhaps, to the circuit court, only to be told the same thing that the Court of Appeals just said, in this case up in Alexandria, that the BZA exceeded its authority. So I bring that to your attention because I think it's a legitimate issue, and I'm not sure what to do about it, and you all have to decide. Now, what I am going to do, and I'm erring on the side of caution here, there may be something, I don't know about this, some other provision, but I'm going to analyze, I don't think this has been done completely before, I'm going to analyze the statutory criteria for a variance, because that's the track you've been on, and just be sure that all the information is before you that you need for that purpose. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the exception criteria. Now, as I indicated, there are similarities between the two, but they're not the same. And it's a higher standard for the variance, the first one. Mainly because without the threshold criteria, because you've got to make a preliminary decision, is it a reasonable restriction? Is it a physical hardship? So now, I do want to clear one thing up. There was a suggestion made at your last meeting by Mr. Stewart that granting a variance for this is contrary to the actual language, is the purpose of the ordinance, not just the ordinance, as I think he actually said, but the purpose of the ordinance. It's not. If you have the authority to grant the variance, of course, because the ordinance and the state regs, everything, they include the variance criteria. So it's fully anticipated that there will be some instances where it's appropriate. If that interpretation were correct, you could never grant a variance for anything, because variances are by definition contrary to the ordinance. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now, the starting point, and I'm going to start with the unreasonable restriction prong of the statutory test. What is Mr. Urban asking for? He's asking for a facility to house his very expensive boat. Now, he purchased the lot in 2023. As I think you know, it's at the confluence of two bodies of water. It has a house on it. It is a pre-Ches Bay lot. You couldn't make that lot today. The lot is about 2 acres, and at least 1.7 and probably closer to 1.8 of those acres is encumbered by the RPA. So what can you do? Well, it's a buildable lot. And
I'd like to discuss the variance question first.
yes, sir. All right. You mean which way to go?
I'm sorry.
You mean which prong to go? Which way to go?
No.
On the threshold?
My view of what you're stating with respect to, are we in authority to grant a variance?
Okay, certainly, sure.
The state
Yes, sir.
tells us that
Yes,
we
sir.
are, and
Yes,
the
sir.
county has designated this body to do so.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Variances.
Mm-hmm.
The county has absorbed the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act into its ordinances. It has just accepted it as it is, as part of what we do. So if the language is different between them, I go on what the county tells us, and that is
I understand, sir.
a variance.
Yes, of course, I understand that you've got an ordinance and you all,
Follow
really
it.
feel you got to comply with the ordinance. As I indicated, sir, I am putting this on the record because if it comes up later, I want to be sure that it was out there, because they may be the ones raising that if we ever got to circuit court.
Understood.
Okay. Now, variance, okay. So first issue is and that's the road I was headed down, talking about the unusual situation that Mr. Carabin finds himself in. Then basically the entire parcel is encumbered by the RPA. So what he's asking for is, in my view, a reasonable thing for a boater. He's got a very expensive boat. It's a 10-foot wide and 30-foot long boat, and he does pull it out of the water every winter. It doesn't stay in the water. King George County does not have a boat hotel. We have some in Stafford, but not over here. So what is he looking for? He's a boat lover, and he is looking for a place to house his boat, to protect it from the elements, to winterize it, and to do his routine maintenance all season. So that is the primary purpose of what's being proposed to you. Now, the The unreasonable restriction, I think, is this. And I'm going to analyze both prongs. I think the unreasonable restriction is this. What he is seeking to do is a completely reasonable thing from the standpoint of a property owner on the water that owns a boat. So if you say, no, he can't have this, you are restricting his full utilization of that parcel, which has a number of issues with it anyway. So that, I think, is an unreasonable restriction to impose on this property owner. So that's how I analyze that threshold. I'm going to go ahead with the other threshold question before I get to the specific criteria. And of course, the other threshold is whether there is a...
Please stay close to the mic.
I'm sorry?
Please stay close to the mic.
Okay. Alleviate a hardship due to a physical hardship due to a condition relating to the property. Well, the condition relating to the property here is that it is encumbered by the RPA. It's a lawful lot, but most of the lot is in the RPA. Now, the RPA came along after the lot was subdivided and after it was built on. So, but it's still a lawful lot. It's Preches Bay lot. And, you know, are those individuals to be treated differently than somebody that had a lot on the water without as much RPA? They probably all have some, but not this much. And it's because of the particular location. So the hardship, the physical hardship, is the unusual shape of the lot, the fact that it is in between two bodies of water, and it's actually a peninsula and comes to a point at one side. And there are simply not very many places on the property where anything can be built out of the RPA. Now, our engineer who talked with you last time and who's here tonight has looked at the entire property. Is there a place you could have a boat storage facility closer to the water so there's more proximity to the water? It's right next. Well, out to the end where the dock is, you've got a 20-foot drop-off. Over to the other side of the property from the structure being proposed, there is marshland. You can't get a boat in there. So, you know, they looked the property over very carefully and decided this was the only location for a structure designed to accomplish what he intends here. Now, so, you know, which way do you go? Now, I do have, and I know, Mr. Chairman, that you're already acquainted with the two prongs and that you can go either way. There is another 2024 case out of the Court of Appeals, and one that I was involved in over in the county of Louisa, where variance was granted by the circuit court. BZA turned it down, court granted it, Court of Appeals held it up. And this is the first case to analyze the 2015 amendments to your variance criteria. So it's a valuable case. The case is Board of Supervisors for County of Louisa versus Valerie Holdings of Virginia. And I did bring a bunch of copies of that. If you'd like to have them, I don't mean necessarily to read them tonight, but it works through the analysis, also makes the point. You don't have to go with both of them. You have to analyze both of them. In that case, the circuit court judge only analyzed the unreasonable restriction, decided that was sufficient. The criteria were all met. He didn't even look at physical hardship. But, you know, you can go either way you want on that threshold question. You have to decide, you know, which is stronger, which is more appropriate, you know, one or both or neither. Now the criteria themselves are somewhat more straightforward, and I think on their face, less analytic. First, of course, is that the property was acquired in good faith, and any hardship, not the hardship, but any hardship, was not created by the applicant. Now, the lot, as I indicated, was purchased in 2023, waterfront lot, lots of opportunities for somebody interested in the water and specifically in boating. So he paid $775,000 for the lot and for another lot right next to it, unusable, has no buildable pad in or out of the RPA, but there are actually technically two lots combined there the second of which is pretty worthless.
Are you describing the applicant's lot or the precedent lot that you're talking to, 2015?
I'm sorry, you mean?
You
the
spoke
case that I
about
was-
a case that
Oh, yeah,
occurred
no, I'm
previously.
talking about Mr. Caravan's lot now. We're back to the criteria. The case that I told you about simply lays out very specifically the analytic framework that the BZAs are to follow in the state courts if it gets to that level. And it's a helpful device. I just bring it to your attention because, you know, for the first time, we have an appellate decision that actually addresses the 2015 amendments.
Okay, there are 2 points to be made. One, the state describes our responsibilities as a Board of Zoning Appeals, and in that description, it says that we are not bound by precedents, that they are never the same as the case before you. So we don't even look at the precedents because we're not bound by them. We're an individual case based on individual applicants and individual response from the Board of Zoning Appeal. The second one was that we've established in the previous 2 meetings that we're looking at the variance on a position of reasonableness. Reasonable, is it reasonable or not reasonable to allow?
Unreasonable restriction.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're not even arguing if it's an unreasonable restriction. We're just looking at the fact that it's there. So the RPA is there, and your applicant has made adjustments and submitted a drawing today that addresses the situation to some degree. So we probably should focus on that. Oh, and there is a third. What goes into the barn is not, or the pole barn or the garage, it's not our concern.
Understand. And to your first point, I'm aware, and I've heard from other BZAs, and it's true. You're not bound by precedent. So the only reason I bring up the case is because it's a useful device, okay? And it does analyze the 2015 criteria. Not that you couldn't do so all by yourselves without the assistance of the court. Now, as far as the, how you're working through the analysis, that's up to you. But if we're here on a variance, then, there's a set procedure to go through and certain criteria to be addressed. And as you pointed out at the last meeting, I think that, that's an or in between unreasonable restriction and physical hardship.
Right.
So I just trying to give you what I know about this, and you may not need any of that, but I still want to get it on the record.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Now, so the property was acquired. I think certainly in good faith, certainly paid market value for it, and saw it as it knew it was a pre-Ches Bay lot and had a lot of opportunities and a lot of waterfront and a great place for him to retire and enjoy his boating. Now, any hardship was not created by the applicant. That's part of that same first criteria. Well, the state law is, of course, what established the RPA. Nothing that he did. So, I mean, that is the difficulty, the hardship, if you will, for doing anything on this lot is where you do it and how you avoid the RPA, which I submit you can't. Now, the granting of the variance is not detrimental to adjacent properties. This is a relatively small structure. It's a relatively big lot. The closest houses are on the other side of the street from this. There's nothing on either side of any proximity. So I think it's clear that, I hope you can tell, but that does not affect anybody's view shed. There have been no objections from the neighbors that I'm aware of, and he's talked with his neighbors. So I assume if they had a problem with it, they would come and tell you about that, but there's not. I don't think a building of this size would be inherently detrimental to neighboring properties. Now, the third issue is not so general or reoccurring as to make reasonably practical a general regulation. This is pretty much a one-for. I mean, there are not too many instances where you have pre-Ches Bay lots that are encumbered to this extent by RPA. Most lots face the water. They may be pre-Ches Bay, and there's an RPA, but just on one side of the lot. This one's surrounded by the lot. So I don't think it's feasible for anybody at the county, clever as some of the county officials are, to come up with something that would address other instances of this, because I don't think you'll ever see one again. And it may be that King George County will never see one again. Now, number 4 is the variance does not create a use not permitted on the property. It doesn't. This is a use in an accessory building that's permitted on the property. It's not a new use. It's something permitted within the residential and even agricultural zoning districts. So there's no new use here. And the relief is not available through a special exception process. Now that's an interesting one. Back to the exception. Now, I don't think this is a reference to, in the state code, anything coming out of the Ches Bay regs, but it does say special exception. Now, I know in King George County that what is referred to in some other locations as special use permits and conditional use permits is a special exception here in King George, same process. But there is nothing in the ordinance that would open up a special exception process for this applicant. I think you're aware of that. Now, I would, and then of course you have the ability to impose conditions that would run with any variance. And, you know, there are 2 drawings that have been prepared for you and shared with you in advance. One is that the larger structure is the one that he believes he needs in order to accomplish his purpose. More of that structure is in the RPA. There's also another one which has a 10-foot intrusion into the RPA. Now, happy to limit the boating activity, to one portion of this facility, but recall that we're dealing here with a boat that's 10 feet wide and 30 feet long. So it is not a small vehicle, and there's all kinds of other equipment and things that go with it, including a skiff that is sometimes used to service the larger boat. So if there are appropriate conditions, then I'm sure you will add those to any variance that you might approve here. Now, what I would like to do, and again, Mr. Chairman, I hear what you say about this delegation and why you all are stuck with the regs, and I predicted that would be your position. But to the end of establishing a record, the Ches Bay exception criteria, and they're short, very much like the variance criteria, except there's no starting point. I'll tell you that I don't think there's any question, given the delegation permitted in the Ches Bay regs, that you all can hear an exception. My question is about the variance. Now, that's beyond your scope, and I hear you on that, but I may have to deal with it somewhere else. So here are the criteria for an exception. And they're similar. First of all, minimum necessary, that is, the relief granted is the minimum necessary to afford the relief or the request, minimum necessary to afford relief. So, we're trying to completely stay out of the RPA as much as possible, but still have a building that is suitable for its purposes. And, Mr. Carabin would tell you that the purposes of the building are to house his boat and other paraphernalia. He has a very small garage on the side of the house. So for him to do what he wants to do with the property, the larger building is what he would like to see. Now, second, does not confer any special privilege on an applicant denied to other property owners. Well, I don't think any other property owners have been before you on this, and there's nothing inherent about this that gives him a special privilege. It's a process that he goes through, and anybody else seeking relief would also have to go through. So there's no special privilege here. He has to jump through the hoops, just like anybody else would coming through this. Now, the third criterion is the exception is in harmony with the purpose intent of the regs, and specifically not of substantial detriment to water quality. Okay, now I think this is very similar to the provision in the variance definition, which says that you know, the variance has to be consistent with the purpose of the ordinance. Well, like the variance, the criteria is built into the regs. And it's right there. It's part of the exceptions. So once again, the drafters here have anticipated that there are going to be these situations and apply for relief. So I don't think that is interpreted any differently than you would for your variance. Now, the exception request was not based on self-created conditions. Now, sort of like self-imposed hardship, but self-created conditions. Well, he didn't create the condition that brings him here. You know, that was something that was imposed on the property, and Shez Bay Act had a wonderful public purpose and has achieved great things, but that was what led to the extensive RPA on this previously approved and subdivided parcel. So he didn't make that. And then finally, this is the end. Reasonable and appropriate conditions may be imposed here too. So without the threshold analysis, the criteria themselves are pretty similar to a variance. Now, that is all that I wanted to put before you. I do have, of course, Mr. Carabin is here. I have the engineer here. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. 1 minute. The criteria, no substantial detriment to water quality. The third criteria. You know, that's why a water quality impact assessment is done and was done in this case, to show that there is no detrimental effect on the water. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, yes, sir. All right, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but you probably
Well,
you may not have it.
no, are there any questions? Okay, thank you.
All right,
Sorry, I
thank you, sir.
should have asked that.
I should.
Is there a presentation from the applicants group? Oh,
Yeah, you can show that.
Just kidding, you get to hear from me. Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. We prepared for you all some properties with similar circumstances, and if it's okay if I could pass out a printout of these similar properties? Yeah, it's similar in nature to what we're trying to accomplish, and they're also in King George.
well, we'd prefer, actually, at least the chair would prefer that you get to the point of what you're trying to present today.
Maybe I can clarify. We made the point that he's trying to do something reasonable with his property. These are simply other examples in King George County that have the very kind of structure that he's seeking to do here. Other waterfront properties. We don't know where the RPA is on the properties, but what he's trying to accomplish, that's all that it stands for. So,
Okay, can you project what you are presenting today on the screen? Can we have that projected so we can see it?
I don't think so, although she has copies.
Oh, we can't? Okay, that's all right. We got them before us. So let me describe what I
thought you would have had it by hand.
no, the site plan.
Yes, the site plans are here, yes, Yeah, both site plans are here. The parcel.
We need you by the mic.
Yeah, come on
I
up here.
can barely hear
Okay.
what you're saying.
This is the version that we presented to you all at the last meeting, and then the next slide is the third version that was presented to you all as well as you requested.
Right, that's what we see before us.
I believe at the last meeting, there was a suggestion made about an alteration to the building, but I don't think you wanted to look at that because it hadn't been presented by the applicant. So that's the intent.
My position was that we would or should not vote on conjecture, but only on what is written down.
Yes, So that's why we brought the two. So see the full picture of what we understand was suggested and what Mr. Carabin would like to see on the property. So.
All right, so this is what you're projecting, and you'd like us to act on. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, sir.
All right. Just a few things, and I'll open it up for discussion. But across the last two meetings, it was clear that we're looking at whether or not it's a reasonable, in the end, the applicant has made a case for a reasonable incursion into the RPA. He started out with 4,950 square feet of incursion into the RPA. At one point, we talked about a 40% reduction in that, which got us down to about 2,000 square feet. Today, according to these drawings, as I understand it, this 10-foot incursion is about 50 square feet. So I'm going to open it up 155 square feet. Thank you. Thank you. I was trying to do the math in my head. I'm a result of public school math. All right. So that's a lot more than 50 square feet. But nevertheless, at one of the last meetings, I made it clear that our view was determining the Board of Zoning Appeals. Their place in this matter is defining the term reasonable in this case. And that's what we're about today. So I'll open it up for discussion. Is there a discussion? Is there a motion to accept or reject this applicant's submission? Speak to the mic, please.
I move that we accept this as it is.
A little louder, please.
I move that we accept this new one that has 155 square feet. It's reasonable, it's big enough for his boat, and if it's okay with them, I think it's a reasonable thing.
So I think I heard that you're moving that this is the 155 square foot incursion is reasonable.
That's correct.
Is there there is discussion. I'll start with, remember, if there's a variance granted, constraints can be provided by the Board of Zoning Appeals that you must follow. There are a few other things. If you do not start within 12 months of you being granted a variance, then the variance disappears. You have to start within 12 months. Your mic, turn on your mic.
I don't know how to do that.
Oh, well, speak loud.
I can start immediately.
Thank you. The applicant says that he could start immediately, so that's not an issue for him. All right, is there discussion over the motion to allow for this incursion into the buffer, the RPA, into 100 square feet? Can I ask if you can determine the impact across that 155? Like, how many beams are you pushing something into the ground? Can you just describe the apparatus that would be across the RPA?
How y'all doing? I guess it would mainly depend on the actual structure design that he goes with. I mean, if he did this as like a normal, excuse me, like a normal garage, or could be a footer dug for a concrete wall to be set on for the garage, or I guess he could be building like a pole barn design where they just come in and pour a concrete slab down for the structure. So it'd be one of the two, most likely. Does that answer your question?
Well, it sounds a little like you haven't planned the garage.
Oh, it is a pole barn. I'm sorry.
All right.
Yes. So it would be, yeah.
So there would be pilings
Yes.
across into the RPA area,
Yes.
probably 3.
Yeah.
And that's this kind of impact at each point.
Yeah.
All right,
Be
can I,
about-
that's fine. Can I ask, the county, Mr. Smolnick? The challenge before us is that we recognize it's crossing the barrier. For us to figure that out reasonably, we have to understand what we think the impact might be. Is it a small impact, a larger impact, right? These are things for us to work through, but in order for us to approve or disapprove, if we were to approve, could a constraint be that once we've approved it, so you're working with the applicant to minimize the impact into the RPA, and he presents to you something that you could work with, or you need something from them to ensure minimization of impact. Is there something in there that, if we ended tonight, that you could finish?
I guess my question for the applicant is what's presented to the BZA tonight? Will this be submitted? He will need to obtain a building permit for the structure. I guess my question is the detailed plan that is shown before you tonight, is that what will be accompanying his building permit application? Because we're going to have to review something concrete to approve it, and then we will be going out there probably every week, week and a half, maybe 2 weeks for inspections to ensure compliance with said drawing. So I just want to, so that's what we're going to need. So I just want to make sure that what is shown here, I know there's been a lot of talk about plantings, mitigation, all that. Will that be part of the building permit submittal that we can review and ensure conformity in the field as it's being constructed?
If there's an approval from the board, the constraints will follow that approval. Meet what you just said.
Okay, thank you.
Is there other discussion? There being no discussion,
We may have some more information, specificity of the plans that were submitted for the last building permit.
having to do with the kinds of things the applicant will do to minimize impact or account for that through other means?
Before this exercise began, I think the board realizes that they did apply for a building permit and was denied. So there were some very specific plans that were developed at that time, thinking they would be going ahead with the construction. And it wasn't turned down because of the lack of specificity of the plans. So I believe that that level is out there and was taken to the county last time around. So, as far as something that can be monitored, I mean, a building code is subject to particular rules and regulations, just like anything else. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
You still have to meet the building codes, et cetera.
Of course, and that may be the way to handle it, rather than seeing if the county administrator can come up with something. There's the building code.
I don't think that's appropriate. That's not what we were asking. It was simply,
Okay.
he knows the rules. We don't for a building permit, but if we granted a variance, by the way, because there isn't much to talk about, right? I wrote this, and it's a very interesting statement, Shami. In the exception, relief talks to the minimum necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to point that out because that may help us determine whether we think this is reasonable or unreasonable. And then the variance talks to, is it a reasonable incursion or is it not? So we can add A and B and see if we come up with a C,
Okay.
right? So,
Is that all you need on the building permit?
I really need, and it's in the first meeting, the discussion of all the things that they said they will do to keep the property.
So you mean, mitigation?
Yeah, mitigation.
Yeah, okay, well, because that is, Yeah, he can, that's all detailed on the plan, that's before you all.
Right, and I'm addressing that specifically. We have to know what they are. Now we know they're in writing, so we could apply those as constraints if we grant a variance.
And they're right there on the plan, and I think they brought a summary of that tonight anyway, in case you needed it. But the mitigation, of course, goes to the impervious surface or the water quality that could be affected by this structure. So the mitigation devices, which are mainly plantings, are put there in order to, in this case, I think, eliminate completely any measurable impact from this structure.
All right.
All right, you want us to tell you exactly what they are?
Well, let me finish the process, because I was a little out of process. Is there a second to the motion made to approve this variance?
Second motion.
There's a second. All right, and the discussion would follow, but I'll start with,
For the record, staff has not reviewed this plan for 100% conformity with all regulations, as there was no building permit submitted. This has been a hearing through the BZA. So what is submitted to you tonight, I want to make sure that's clear that if there are deficiencies on the plan that's submitted to you tonight, they will need to be brought up to the minimum standards of the county in order to issue a permit. So what's before you tonight, we did not review it in detail as we would a building plan. We were here simply for a variance. So I just want that on the record, that I don't want the applicant, should a variance be approved, that this is all they have to do. If there are deficiencies here, they will have to be corrected to meet the minimum standards.
That's a separate issue.
I'm sorry,
That's a separate issue, right?
they can't hear you.
That's a separate issue, right?
It is, but it can influence us. So, I was about to ask you, is that any different than anyone else coming before you, right? They have to meet the standards. I don't know why they didn't meet the standard previously, but if it had anything to do with the RPA, this would null that, if we agree. All right, is there other discussion? We have sorry, it just went away. Well, a motion, thank you. We have a motion and we have a second. We can continue with discussion. Is there any other discussion?
Why was the building permit denied?
You have to keep that close for you. You don't speak.
Why was the building permit denied?
The building permit was denied because it fell within the 100-foot buffer.
So the RPA was.
Yes, was the reason for the denial, yes.
It had nothing to do with the structure, it was the RPA.
As is what was stated in the letter, yes.
Okay, so at this point, we do not know if there's any issue with the building,
Plan.
the plan.
Not that we're aware of.
Okay.
But if there is, you have to
That
meet
can
the
be
standard.
addressed.
All right, any other discussion? One thing you taught me tonight is make sure we set the clock. The timer.
Look at your bylaws, I didn't see anything.
10 minutes. All right. Well, let's have a vote. Are all those in favor of passing a variance that would allow 155 square foot incursion into the RPA as designated by this drawing? Please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The constraints will need to be detailed, itemized, and followed. So all that you did previously. Well, I'm just saying they're still involved. They're still part of the case before you. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about going forward? Is there additional information needed to provide, meat to the matter for further review.
If, if the, if the board finds with specificity each of the elements of the variance, on the record, that is appropriate.
All right, so I think he just said if you have that with you, that you should list them out before us. The mitigations that you
Yeah,
presented in the beginning.
Is that what?
No,
You meant the
I meant the
criteria.
BZA needs to make the findings that all of the variance criteria are satisfied specifically.
The 5 criteria, right?
I read one criteria that drives us, just one, not 5. There are 5, but one is affecting us here, and that is whether or not the Board of Zoning Appeals has found or defined adequately what reasonable represents. So is that sufficient that we think 155 square feet incursion with mitigations put in place as reasonable? Is that enough?
There's the 5 additional criteria that are required to be met. There's the threshold criteria of reasonableness, and then there's the 5 criteria about that Mr. Lemming went over. Those findings need to be made specifically for the record.
All right, can you specify them, please?
You have them, I can, whichever way you want to go, I agree with your counsel, but.
I am reading from the King George County standards for the variance written out. The property interest for which the variance is being requested was acquired in good faith, and any hardship was not created by the applicant for the variance. That's 1. 2, the granting of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property and nearby properties in the proximity of that geographical area. 3, that such condition or situation of the property concerned is not of so general or recurring a nature that it could be resolved with an amendment to this ordinance. 4, the granting of the variance does not result in a use that is not otherwise permitted on such property or a change in the zoning classification of the property. And 5, the relief or remedy sought by the variance application is not available through a special exception process that is authorized in the ordinance pursuant to subdivision 6 of the Code of Virginia, section 15.2-2309 as amended, or the process for modification of this zoning ordinance pursuant to subdivision A4 of Code of Virginia, section 15.2-2286 as amended at the time of the filing of the variance application.
We probably should have voted on each one individually. However, what we have are the 5. On the 5th, well, let me back up. There's a philosophy. If you want to make change occur, and there are plans in place, do you change the plan, or do you make changes and plans will follow? It's sort of a question of what comes first, right? If there's a rule and you don't want to follow that rule, the outcome should not be that we violate the rule. We should change the rule first. I don't think that since we have a vote here that we'll still discuss the 5, but the 5th, we have a vote here that says incursion across the RPA is reasonable, right? And so revising the plan, revising the zoning, revising the RPA does not seem necessary. It's a one-on-one situation. It's one question, one answer. There are those out there that might consider that puts us in a place where a lot of appeals come forward. But they have to be very specific. They have to be very close to the mark. What's incredibly hard, given this one, to come close to and come through with an appeal. All right. Was the property acquired in good, I mean, you own it. In good faith. You acquired it, you understood what you were acquiring, and you agree. Okay. Granting this would create no substantial hardship on others. It's not general, the problem is not general enough to warrant a modification to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, the zoning ordinance, the RPA, or the Board of Zoning Appeals edicts. Have I missed anything?
Two more.
Go ahead.
The variance does not create a use not permitted under the
Use
ordinance.
not permitted, okay. It is it is permitted if we've granted the variance. Next.
Yes, that's true. But it's not a new use.
Okay.
That's the point, I think. And then the last one is relief is not available through a special exception process. And you may recall that under the ordinance, there are a number of uses that may be attained in a particular zoning district through a special exception. But there's nothing like that for this.
Right, because if it was not within the RPA, it would just be a simple fact of building your barn.
That's right.
All right.
And if I could back up just a minute, the first one has a second prong to it. Any hardship was not created by the applicant. And I talked about that.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I remember that.
So I think a particular finding on that would be helpful too.
Do we know of any particular hardship that you think the applicant would be imposing on elsewhere?
Well, is it self-imposed? Is there a self-imposed hardship? For instance, the classic example is I build a house, I cross the setback, and then I come to the BZA and say, can I have a variance for that setback incursion? And BZA comes back and says, no, you built the house, you created this. So that, I think, is the classic example of that.
All right.
I also point out that the ordinance, the statute now says you shall grant the variance if you find these things. So very different from the prior code section covering variances, as I'm sure you remember.
Right. All right. Well, from where I sit, unless you disagree here on the board, I don't find anything in this that we've violated. So I think we've met the 5. We detailed our answer to each of the 5. And we can figure that out in the minutes, specify this one was said, this was said, this was said. Okay. Is that sufficient?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, do you have that listing of the mitigations that you had committed to previously?
Yes, mitigation devices.
Yes.
Casey, you're up again. Can you walk them through the mitigation plantings?
Yes.
Okay.
And you'll need to submit that to the minutes in the county for their monitoring.
Yes, so the mitigation and the stormwater management side of things that are presented on this plan, and I briefly discussed it in the prior meeting, but it is all calculated based on their overall disturbance inside of the buffer. Per every 400 square foot, there is 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 small shrubs. And per our plan here, we end up with 1,590 square foot of land disturbance proposed, which comes out to about,
Maybe less than that. Now, does that take into account the reduced size of the structure?
yes, this is alluding to version number 3 here that they voted on it. Yeah, so 1,590 square foot of total disturbance, in which case comes out to about 3.98 divided by 400. So 4 units are required per every 400 square foot. And those would be those tree symbols you see by the buffer area, the 50-foot buffer, and the small shrubs that are up
Alright.
against the northeastern side of the building.
All
Which
right.
would be on the RPA side. And then the other part of this would be the stormwater management, which would be the 2 float wells that are called out that will be capturing rooftop discharge, and treating it in that BMP device.
So that number you said is from all that inside, that is the limits of disturbance.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yeah, and that's basically, it's drawn here where there's about a 10-foot area
Well,
around the structure that we consider
Okay,
to
the
be
number is
disturbed.
1,590 square feet, but that's where it is. It's right there.
Yes, sir.
Tell them where this all comes from, where you get to be sure they understand that this is coming from.
Oh, yeah, and as far as the mitigation and the stormwater management comes from DEQ guidelines and regulations, which the mitigation would be from the riparian buffers manual, and that's for the plantings and restoration, and then the stormwater stuff is based off of which you will find on sheet 3 of this page, using the Virginia runoff reduction method for stormwater management that we are required to follow through DEQ.
So do you understand, Mr. Carabin or his representative, that those mitigations are now constraints that you have to complete to, because this variance was granted?
You can make that a condition.
It is a
Right.
condition.
In all fairness, Mr. Chairman, you all voted and didn't make it a condition. Mr. Lemming's right about that, but I think what Mr. Smolnik was saying was they've got to meet the minimum standards regardless, and we don't know if that meets the minimum standards because they've not reviewed it. If you all wanted to impose conditions, with all due respect, probably could reconsider your vote. You could probably make your findings before you voted, impose any conditions, and perhaps council could help you with a motion that did all that if you all want fine. But you've already done it without conditions.
Good advice. You went through the criteria after the vote.
Anybody here feel like moving that we back away from the vote we've taken and the article set forth? The motion? That's a good question. Can we
I
move?
think that would be a good idea to rescind and redo it. So
No,
that
she asked if we could just make a motion to add those conditions
You've already accepted it
without conditions.
without the
She's,
condition.
she's asking if she can make a motion to, add conditions. And then it would be seconded and voted on.
No, because the thing has already been accepted. I recommend if you want to add conditions, and for the clarity of the record and the integrity of the process, it is a good idea to do it again.
No. I just wanted to clarify, and maybe this will make things a little easier. Upon the approval, to make things clear, that would be for the 155 square foot encroachment and for the 1,590 square foot of land disturbance as part of the approval of the variance here. And all of the stormwater stuff and all the mitigation stuff is something that, for this type of project, would be required throughout the county process anyways. And so really the main question would be, or the main thing going forward is that if we agree on the encroachment, then the review of all the other stuff will be part of the building permit process.
All right, I think I understood what you said, but I'm looking at the drawing, and the drawing shows those things. And this drawing is what we approved the variance on it.
Mr. Chairman, he's right about that under the law. I don't think there's any discrepancy about that. And we can have our engineer speak to that if you have questions, Ms. Ferrugi. I guess what I was suggesting, sometimes beyond what the minimum standards are, some BZAs say we want you to put a rain barrel on each corner of the roof because the water's shedding off into the RPA, or we want you to use, I hate to say this, porous concrete or some, there are other conditions you could impose as a result of granting a variance, but they will require the minimum standards for planting and mitigation for the disturbance that will occur both in the construction and the incursion into it. And the only thing I was suggesting was if you wanted to do that, and I think your counsel is right, you've got to unwind and start all over again and make your findings, impose your additional conditions, and then vote.
If we wanted to do what?
Impose additional conditions. Yes, sir.
Conditions.
They're going to require all those plantings that the young man showed you all on the plans. They're going to require that and potentially more depending upon what meets the minimum standards.
Does the board think we need to impose additional standards? That's the discussion. Additional conditions is what I meant to say. Go ahead.
I believe what I heard from council is a recommendation to renew or to pull this back, go through the criteria as part of the process and document it, as well as capture conditions, and then redo the vote.
That's the best way to ensure that everything is done properly, the record is preserved, and on appeal, it would be, if an appeal happens.
Right, that just makes everything holistic and puts it all in a, puts a nice wrapper on it. So if it does have to proceed to the next level, then we've done our due diligence and properly.
Correct.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we revisit our vote, pull it back, and discuss the criteria.
It's a motion to rescind.
Rescind. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's the words I want to use. Motion to rescind.
So the motion is simply a motion to rescind the previous original motion. No set purpose. I'm sorry, what?
Do we have to
You have to
discuss it?
put this up close.
Do we have to discuss it?
Is there a second?
I second it.
Then we have to discuss it. Well, there's opportunity to discuss it. We don't have to.
All right, so what are the words that we need to get it from the lawyers?
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
What additional constraints would we recommend imposing? We already have a set of conditions that must be met. What are the additional conditions we would consider them having to follow in this case?
I think we've already outlined.
I'm not sure.
I can't hear you, Mark.
I was under the impression that we had already outlined all those conditions, so.
And Senator Stewart outlined to us, I think, that the conditions, they're not conditions, but they're simply situational that must be met, right? And you'll get that done through the county, not through us. So I'm asking again, what are the additional conditions?
I was under the impression that we didn't say it correctly.
Do you feel that's the case?
Correct words to encompass what we wanted to say, to get it all in there.
I do think it would be prudent to make the findings in advance of adopting the motion. There is also, in my opinion, ambiguity in the record as to what conditions, if any, beyond the standard requirements for building permits and so on, have been imposed by the board. I think it would be prudent to make those explicit and clear.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of rescinding the original motion, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes nay. Motion passes. Is there now a revised motion that someone would like to put forth?
Asking for any additional conditions, I didn't want to, I was just suggesting and as much on their behalf as anybody's, because it's not the county I'm worried about attacking this. It could be a neighbor or somebody else. But I think your counsel's right. You need to make your findings first and then vote to approve this. And you may want to just hold off and let him help you with that motion. Just a suggestion is all. Now then you got a good record, and I'm not sure it's going to be
All right.
disturbed.
So, what might the wording be to be clear?
So, a motion to make findings, and then we could do the 5 findings that we spelled out earlier. And you can adopt the findings. Once the findings are adopted, then you can move to grant the variance as has been submitted and discussed.
And the second part would be a second motion, right?
Correct.
Yes.
All right, I have a motion. I'm talking to the attorney. I mean, as an example, I have theoretically, we need to make a motion to answer to the 5 constructs and our position on that, right? And then what?
And then a second motion to grant the variance.
Oh, all this is about the 5, not about mitigations and such.
If there are additional conditions, you could make that as part of adopt the variance, or with these conditions, or as part of your findings in terms of the 5 criteria, impose the conditions then. But I think there needs to be the initial decision whether to, the discussion
That all
about whether
5.
to have it in the additional
right.
conditions in the first place.
All right, so does the board feel that there should be additional conditions imposed? And if so, make a motion to state that.
Beyond what's on here?
Correct.
I do not.
Anyone else? She said she does not. Feel the need for any additional conditions to impose upon this applicant that was not already indicated in the diagram before you?
I agree with that.
You agree with her, there are none?
Yes.
Okay. Mark? Bob?
Yeah,
Tyler?
I agree as well. I'm not tracking any additional conditions beyond the site plan,
They're
resubmitting the
gonna
permit.
turn in their plans and have them assessed.
Yep.
So.
And that's all part of the
and
normal
get their
process.
Building
So
permit, and that's, they're
I'm
gonna.
sorry, Mr. Chairman, that, what's on that site plan, they are not conditions.
We're not saying they're conditions.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you
Yeah.
said anything beyond
I'm
those
asking if there
conditions.
are there conditions that they want to impose that go beyond what we see before us?
No.
Whether you call them conditions or something else, but what's in print. They're being done, we're going to need a little help, so there being none, I'm going to ask for a motion to address these findings specifically, and the help we need from you is a 1-by-1 iteration of what that is, or give it to me, whichever the case. Or whoever would like to make the motion. All right, so we have these conditions, and in order to grant a variance, we have to show that strict application of terms of the ordinance would not unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property, that the granting of the variance would alleviate a hardship due to a physical condition relating to the property or its improvements at the time effective date of the ordinance. Keep that in mind. And those conditions are and the property interest for which the variance is being requested was acquired in good faith and any hardship was not created by the applicant for the variance. The granting of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property and nearby properties in the proximity of that geographical area. These are findings that we must make in order to approve this variance. That such condition or situation of the property concerned is not of so general or recurring a nature that it could be resolved with an amendment to this ordinance. The granting of the variance does not result in use that is not otherwise permitted on such property or change in the zoning classification of the property, and the relief or remedy sought by the variance application is not available through a special exception process authorized in the ordinance pursuant to subdivision 6 of the Code of Virginia 15.2-2309 as amended, or the process for modification of the zoning ordinance pursuant to subdivision A alpha 4 of the Code of Virginia 15.2-2286 as amended at the time of the filing of the variance application. So here's what I would suggest, just to be clear. When you make a motion, then we will restate these 5, and that's what we'll be determining this variance on, right? So is there a motion? Then no, that's not correct. We don't need a motion now. We need a statement. Was there a motion? I'm sorry, I forgot. What did we make a motion?
You need to make the findings.
All right. So these would be okay. So pursuant to the Code of Virginia 15.2-2309-2309, parents 2, as amended, it shall be granted if evidence shows that the strict applications of term of the ordinance would unreasonably restrict utilization of the property. Do we agree that this is not an unreasonable restriction on the utilization of the property? Any disagreement? So, I'm sorry, what?
Read that last sentence again.
A variance shall be granted, so this is in evidence shown that the strict application of the terms of the ordinance would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. Do we feel that voting on this in the positive would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property?
I think the correct way to read that is, does the strict application result in an unreasonable restriction on the applicant's use? I don't have the words in front of me, but that's how it should be read.
And what do we need to do that? Vote?
You need to make that finding, and when you adopt when you grant the variance, that's when.
Okay, that's where the difficulty comes in, is in the language. So it's a function of, we find, this is a statement. I'm not saying it's my position. It's a statement that we find, do we find that the application of the ordinance would unreasonably restrict the use of the property? And I would project from the board's silence that we do not find that this creates an unreasonable. See, that's my problem is, do we need a vote? At what point do we vote? These are just findings.
These are just findings. If you would like to vote on the findings,
All right,
you can
so
have
we'll
that.
vote at the end, right? All right, so I'm saying then that we're finding that there's no evidence to indicate that the strict application or terms of the ordinance would unreasonably restrict the use of the property given the variance we would grant. Or that the granting of the variance would alleviate a hardship. We do not find that to be the case.
I still think you have it backwards.
Does he have it backwards?
Yeah, that's what he said, yes.
Okay.
So how about I just say that we find that pursuant to the Code of Virginia 15.2.2309, Parents 2 as amended, we find throughout this, and I'll reread them, I don't even know how to answer the first part of that paragraph. We find there's no evidence granted. See? And I know some English, but this one's a little hard.
You would say, we find the evidence shows that the strict application of the terms of the ordinance would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property, or that the granting of the variance would alleviate a hardship due to a physical condition.
All right, so I'm projecting that we find that go ahead.
Yeah, we find that the strict application of the terms would.
We find that the strict application of the terms projected in Code of Virginia 15.2-2309 in Parents 2, that the strict application of the terms of the ordinance would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property, or that granting of the variance would alleviate hardship due to a physical condition relating to the property or its improvements at the time of the effective date of the ordinance. And so on that second half, it would be we are finding that granting of the variance is immaterial. It won't affect. It doesn't project a hardship. It should be two sentences.
So on the second one, you would find that granting the variance would alleviate a hardship due to a physical condition.
Or its improvement at the time of the date of the ordinance. How do we answer that? How do we even know?
Because it's an or, you can just find first part.
All right, so on the first part, we find that that evidence shows the restricted application of the terms of the ordinance would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. We find that the property interest for which the variance is being requested was acquired in good faith and any hardship was not created by the application of the finding. We find that granting of the variance will not be substantial detriment to any adjacent property and nearby properties in the proximity of that geographical area. We find that such condition or situation of the property concerned is not of so general or recurring a nature that it could be resolved with an amendment to this ordinance. We find that granting of the variance does not result in a use that is not otherwise permitted on such property or a change in the zoning classification of the property. And we find that the relief of remedy sought by the variance application is not available through a special exception process that is authorized in the ordinance pursuant to subdivision 6 of the Code of Virginia 15.2-2309 as amended or not as amended. Well, there's an or. We find that the process for modification of this zoning ordinance pursuant to subdivision A4 of the Code of Virginia 15.2-2286 as amended at the time of the granting of the variance application. Given those findings, do we have a motion to grant an incursion as described here, 155 square foot incursion into the RPA? Do we find, we require a motion to vote on allowing that incursion to take place?
I'd like to make that motion. I so move.
Is there a second?
I second.
Is there discussion by the board? Finding no discussion, we'll take a vote. Those in favor of the motion, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Now what's the second motion that we're supposed to make?
Because the findings were already made, there's no second motion that needs to be done.
All right, does that complete the proceedings for this application?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, then. I have a discussion of new business. Ms. Tuttle, is there a way to get us to the next meeting earlier than March?
That would be up to our legal representation, who is out of the office until that time.
All right, thank you.
The application of that case has agreed to meet in March.
All right, well, that helps.
Okay.
Very nice of them. Thank them. All right. There being no other discussion on this application, is there a motion to end this meeting?
Make a motion.
I make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Is there a second?
I'd like to ask a question first.
Yeah, Mark, we really, for process purposes, we should have a second to open it up for discussion. Go ahead. Speak. I mean, generally speak.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure in my own mind that we've finished this process for the family. You can go ahead and do what they want to do. Is that not correct or correct?
It is correct.
Okay, so, okay. In that case, I will second your motion.
In that case, what?
I second the motion that we adjourn.
Oh, okay. Is there discussion? Given the motion has no discussion, let's vote on the motion to adjourn. All those who agree, anyway, just raise your right hand and say aye. 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 Chair votes aye, motion carries. We're finished here.